Good morning. My name is Jennifer Gallipo, and I am the Interim Dean of the College of Hospitality Management and Associate Provost for Academic Affairs at Johnson & Wales University, or JWU to our friends, and we count you all as friends. It is our great pleasure to be able to welcome you all to the College of Hospitality Management and to our inaugural Hospitality Summit. This year's theme, Paths to Prosperity, is especially relevant given the challenges we have all faced over the past 18 months. Prosperity can be defined as successful, flourishing, or thriving. And I think we can all agree that while recovery takes time, it is evident that we are on the path towards prosperity and moving forward. Today's program was months in the planning and intentionally developed by the faculty in the International Hotel School to resonate across hospitality industry segments, providing ample opportunity for thought-provoking conversation about the future of the industry we love so well. Finally, before I introduce our keynote speaker, let me share a few housekeeping details. We will be using the live transcript feature today. Should you wish to use this feature, please click the live transcript button located at the bottom of your screen and click Show Subtitles. The Q&A feature has been enabled for this webinar, and we will answer as many questions as time allows following the presentation. If we are unable to answer your question during today's webinar, we will follow up accordingly after the summit. In addition, this session is being recorded, and the link to the recording will be shared with attendees following the summit. Now, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, James LaHouliere, Managing Partner and CEO of D. Leonardo International, described on the company's website as an international design firm focused on creating hospitality spaces that do their jobs with grace and flair. As Managing Partner and CEO, Dr. LaHouliere's charge is to strive for excellence, supporting D. Leonardo's goal to be the best. In doing so, he oversees D. Leonardo's global operations with a guiding focus on advancing its reputation for exceeding client expectations. Dr. LaHouliere grew up on a dairy farm in a small ski town in Vermont near Montreal. When not traveling or in the office, you will find him outside on his tractor at his Rhode Island farm home. To quote his recent remarks, "I get to travel, interact with diverse people, explore different perspectives, and immerse myself in new cultures. I am so fortunate to be able to learn something new every day. I love what I do." In 2008, JWU was pleased to award James LaHouliere an honorary doctorate, and today we are equally honored to have him serve as our keynote speaker for the inaugural Hospitality Summit. Welcome, Dr. LaHouliere.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Jen. I definitely sound a lot more important than I actually am, but I do appreciate to be here this morning and talking to all the friends and alumni and students and faculty of JWU. It's a wonderful institution. I'm very honored to be here and talk about design and brands, hotel brands. So a little bit about ourselves quickly. If we have some, it worked as we did our run through. Here we go. So we're a family business based in Rhode Island. Our headquarters is in Warwick, Rhode Island, but we've been in business for 50 years now. This is our 1971. We were established. There's 4 partners in the firm. Bob DeLeonardo started the company, has a long affiliation with the university for the past probably 30 years or more. His 2 daughters and myself, I'm the 4th partner. We've done close to about 40,000 guest rooms around the globe. About 40 different continents. We have 22, maybe 23 different nationalities now on staff from varied backgrounds and perspectives. Our offices in the States, our world headquarters is in Rhode Island. We have Dubai, Hong Kong, and Manila. We're about probably 85 people globally, but we work as one kind of global shopping firm. But really, I think any great firm is based on its people, and we have a great, interesting, fun, lean in perspective staff that's not just creative, but also really good business people. And that's always been our mandate from the beginning when Bob DeLeonardo started the company, that we're here to help our clients be successful, not just aesthetically, but also financially. These are just some of the brands we've worked with. We used to be able to say that we've worked with all the brands, but there's new brands popping up every 5 or 6 weeks, and are kind of segmenting the brands and within, from a 3-star to a 4-star, from a select service to a full service. There's all this segmentation, and the brands are keep pushing out new brands to basically flag and develop hotels and increase their revenue. So as we'll explore some of those brands today as we go forward. So to talk about hotel brands and design, I think it's important to look where we came from. Back in the very early days, it was an inn or a few rooms over a tavern at an intersection. As cities became a little bit larger, there'd be more established kind of properties. Then as with the advent of the automobile age, things started to change. So, and actually the big brands came into emergence about the 1920s to the 1950s. Your Holiday Inns, your Hiltons in Texas, Miss Conrad Hilton bought his first 3 or 4 properties in the mid to late 20s, I believe. But there was the emergence of the origins of brands, but most were independent in nature and unique in nature. And that was great. You have a different experience no matter where you are. And I love this property here, this Marriott, this motel kind of look, from the 50s. However, as a guest and a traveler, there was no kind of brand from a point of view of safety, understanding, quality. You could get one Marriott, which would be probably pretty maybe sketchy, not the most comfortable brand, to a beautiful one that's 2 states over. So there was an emergence of standards from a point of view driven by automobile affiliated companies. So AAA had their diamond rating, 5 through 1 star. And that was more of a tick type of box situation. So did you have a pool? Did you have a guest at the door? Did you a guestman at the door? Was there 2 full service restaurants? Things that were more dictated by just hitting a box. It did not dictate quality though. So you could come into a hotel, it could be the sheets could look dirty, the carpets could be ripped, the tiles in the bathroom could look moldy. It was very, very varied. The other rating system was by Mobil, the old Exxon Mobil gas station. And those were star ratings. So it would go 5 to 4, 1 star. So with that, there was, it worked, it was successful. And then as we kind of saw the emergence of the brands, such as the Marriotts, they started to build brand standards to almost supplant the star rating system. Because one of the big issues with star rating is there is no star rating system really that covers the globe. Every country is independent. If you go to Saudi, there's different ratings for what they require versus Kazakhstan versus Shanghai. And it could be a varied experience across the board, even from a point of view within the brands themselves sometimes. So we have, this is actually one of our projects that we don't have in our portfolio anymore because it's a little dated. But this is where the brands started to come through in the 80s, 90s, and the aughts. If you don't know what the aughts are, that's like 2000 to about 2010, the early 2000s. And a lot of it was, kind of a response of brand standardization, trying to build in expected kind of design, that your guest room would have a desk that was a certain size so you could work on. There would be an expectation the bed would be a certain size, that the doubles would be 2 queens. Every bathroom would have 4 fixtures in a Marriott, as an example. The room size would be dictated. And then there was also the style. Back in this time of design, every Marriott was very similar. You'd be in a Marriott in Providence, it would look like a Marriott in Cairo, Egypt, and it was a lot of based off of reds and greens because that was Mr. Marriott's favorite colors. So every hotel would have reds and greens, and you could not really add different colors into the palette or different design. So it's a little bit more generic in its approach. And that kind of brings us today, because there was a pushback as with the advent of the internet, the ability to book hotels online, the ability to see from TripAdvisor an independent hotel or a boutique hotel that you could see customer reviews on. And it made it easier to see the hotel before you got there and size it up, make a determination like, oh, I see I could stay there, or that looks good to me. So with that, the brand started to explode to tackle these new opportunities and expectations from their guests. So in our discussion today, we've broken it up into a few different kind of buckets or silos. Select service, classic, lifestyle, and independent. If you ask someone else to do this, they'll break it up into some different ways. It could be premium, luxury, and select service. So there's different ways to look at this. But from a design perspective, we think this is a nice way to kind of generate a discussion. So I think it's important to start about how do we create a hotel that is design forward, people-centric, authentic experience. And a lot of that for us in our process and in a lot of firms that we work with is doing a lot of research up front. You have to understand the locale to build a great design story that you can infuse in design. Also, design is also generated by what the market is. As I said before, a 5-star hotel in Warwick is very different than a 5-star hotel, a 5-star Marriott in Dubai. Each market kind of is unique. It has larger competition, increased competition in mature markets. And we need to understand that to make sure we're taking design and creating spaces that will make it successful within that niche market. We look at cultural issues, we look at landscape, we look at almost like a digital anthropologist as we do our research, to really place a design and create a story in DNA. And we also look at the architecture, and the owner's taste do influence our design along the way. And you'll see that in some of the brands as we move forward. Once we do that, we create beautiful renderings, great construction documents, and we oversee the construction. So our first kind of swim lane of the brands is select service. And as you can, these is just a snapshot of select service. There's a lot of them out there these days. But they're more transactional in nature, meaning that there's a strong expectation of when you book a Hampton Inn, that you know exactly what you're going to get, not just from a service perspective and a delivery of a breakfast or maybe an embassy suite, you get your cookie, or excuse me, DoubleTree, you get your cookie. There's an expectation of the look and feel, and it's very dictated by the hotel brands. So it's prototypical in nature, meaning as a design firm, we do not have a lot of choice. We might be able to tweak some of the artwork. We might be able to choose 3 different palettes along the way that might fit in a more of a urban setting versus a more suburban setting or more of a arid climate. But a lot of times it's very structured and it's heavy on standards. So when I say heavy on standards, it means that everything is dictated. The size, the size of the tub, the size of the bathroom, everything is dictated, and you can't really adjust or tweak. So it's a lot of times with these brands, sometimes we can change a color or a fabric, but we have to actually petition the brand to do that along the way. So most owners are like, let's not deal with it. Let's just move forward and get our hotel built and stick with the brand. The reasons the brands do this is they need to keep each of their plethora of brands in their own little swim lanes, meaning you don't want your Hampton Inn in Las Vegas to be a lot nicer than a Hampton Inn that you might see in Springfield, Mass. There needs to be a lot of continuity and expectation from the guest. So what I'll show you now is we have a couple properties and case studies that we'll go through for each of our segmented brands. This is a home to and a Hampton Inn. And this is an interesting part about where some of the hotel brands are going, especially in North America, is dual branded hotels. And it's a great way to reduce the cost, share infrastructure, from a back of house perspective, from an operations perspective, and really reduce overall cost, and also not just building cost, but future labor cost with a shared front desk. And this is we're doing quite a few of these along the way. So it's a wonderful way, which makes it complicated to make a shared lobby. But even with these prototypical brands, we call it enhanced prototypical, I think is the best way to say it. Is we still do our story, we do our narrative, and that research, which I talked about up front, is critical to that. So, this is a few kind of slides that we put together for our design narrative, what we call our narrative development. So we kind of dig back and find some things that we feel could help influence the design based off of what we see in, the history of Las Vegas, where Las Vegas is now, and most importantly, developing a narrative that will help to make this property unique and stand out, even though it's prototypical. So while most of the components you see here, this is part of our design workshop to kind of pull back the curtains a little bit. We, working with the owner, decided we could do a little bit of tweaking on the branding, and Hilton allowed us to do that. So, part of our some of our ideas is, we said there's no love without LV, for Las Vegas. And so this kind of came into some of our design inspiration. Most of the lobby, as you see in the space in the middle here, is all defined by brand. We're just implementing, but we would tweak the branding. And you can see how that kind of came through in the final pictures along the way. Really, the only things else we're touching is artwork. We're trying to influence through artwork. It gives a very subtle reference to the guest, saying, "Oh, I'm in a Hampton. I know as they call it, my Hamptonality can come out in my expectation of what that will be. But I do have a little subtle feel through artwork or through a logo that this is a unique one, and it hopefully generates future brand recognition when you do go to Las Vegas." Some of the exterior shots. And once again, not typical. We were able to do some different things on the exterior because it's less business, more destination. So we had petitioned the brand to make it a little bit more of a robust pool and have, the outdoor seating area to take advantage of, to have it be a little bit more of a destination for guests versus your typical Hampton, which is very kind of straightforward from a component standard. So this is a property in Dubai we opened up. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Radisson. This is the Radisson Red. So this is a select service brand. It kind of seeps into the lifestyle. So a lot of these brands kind of jump into try to dual categories along the way. So select service, very small rooms, probably about 28 square meters or 280, 290 square feet. We're once again going through and having a lot of components dictated. We knew that part of the Radisson Red program, open ceilings, a little bit more industrial in nature, but we were able to tweak the graphics on the food cart or a food truck or food wagon that's in the lobby. Every Radisson Red needs to have this component as part of their brand experience. The target market is about 20 to 35. Single business traveler comes in for 2 or 3 days and leaves. So with that, we're a lot of our design is influenced through our research and our design narrative. However, it's graphical in nature. So a lot of Radisson Reds look the same, but they don't. All we're changing in the room is basically the pattern through a wall covering application behind the typical bed. So as we move on to the tried and true brands, which have emerged, we call these more of the classic brands. Your Sheraton, your Marriott, your Hiltons. We say they're more aspirational in nature, meaning, you have if you go to a Four Seasons or a St. Regis, you have an aspiration to stay there. It's less about the transaction, more about the whole experience that you expect from a Marriott or a Sheraton or Four Seasons or a Park Hyatt along the way. The great part now is that within the last probably 10 to 12 years, these brands have started to respond to the emergence of boutique and independent hotels by trying to make their brands a little bit more authentic, unique, still timeless, a little more, I wouldn't say generic in nature, but have a little bit more authenticity that has a sense of place. It's not as pronounced as you might see in an independent or a boutique, but it's starting to get there, and it's and it's elevated the quality of design. So we're doing a lot more design narratives that for these brands. Still, it is very heavy on standards. So even though the brands will say, "Hey, explore what Plano will look like, Plano, Texas, and what makes Plano Plano, and how do we bring that into design," we are still extremely dictated by what the guest room flooring should be, the size of the bed, the size of the bathroom. And a lot of those restrictions limit our creativity. We have a lot more flexibility than the select service brands, but we're still not wide open to do what we want. So this is an example of a property, a renovation in Plano, Texas. So we've gone through and still, we've started to develop our narrative once again. This is where we always start, that research component. Usually this document's probably, depending on the property, can range from 2 or 3 pages for a select service to one of the other properties, we have about 40 to 50 pages, depending on the depth of the story and the narrative that we have to develop. So you see that this is kind of where we're starting to come up with our ideas that will drive our design. And you'll see the hay bale shapes, line geometry, even the traffic patterns in this area to help kind of influence design in a very subtle way. So we're always very smart of taking the worst possible pictures of the existing, so we look good later along the way. So this is an existing photo of the 3 meal a day restaurant. This is our rendering of the 3 meal. And you can start seeing, based off of our kind of patterns and geometry from our narrative, and the hay bale influence in some of the chandeliers. And this is our final product. So it's very subtle. I mean, if you almost sometimes need to have us there to help tell the story along the way, but it's very subtle in its nature, but it's unique. And that's where some of these classic brands are really headed, where every property is unique, but it's still very grounded in your aspiration of that brand. These are the outdoor pool area, the executive lounge, and then the renderings of the before and the after for the guest room is here. Now, once again, if you look at this room to the bottom right-hand corner, it's a nice room. It's clean, it's simple, it's timeless, and that's where a lot of these classic brands they want to have us put the design in being timeless. But it's, there's something unique and happening and interesting here. And however, this room has only 4 components that we can change. We can change the carpet. We can change the pillows. We have influence, which is based off of our hay bales, the large round bales that are prevalent in the ranches around Plano. And we can change the, actually, there was only the chair fabric. That's it. So the rest of the components are all standardized, and we're just tweaking the edges. It's still very successful. It's creating clean rooms, it's creating a bit modern contemporary design, but it's unique from the Marriott in Plano will be different than the Marriott in Fort Worth. So it's a way to kind of bridge the gap as we move from very standardized select service to the classic, and then as you move to the next bucket that we have, which is the kind of the lifestyle. Now, on the flip side of that, international, classic brands, there is more flexibility. We can tell our story a little more prominent, a little stronger in our execution of the design. So this job is in Alcoba, which is in the northeast corner of Saudi. And we wanted to kind of show, even from a point of view of just the generic design narrative, we also do narratives to place restaurants and to help dictate what a great F&B program can be. So this is for Bahat, they're Arabic restaurants. So, we're getting into not just, light fixtures, but into landscape, into food, into the colors of food, to help kind of create an overall experience for the restaurant that goes with great cuisine and great service. So some of the sketches that we kind of come up with, and this is a great way to have an iteration between us, ownership, us, and brand, to say, here's how we see our design narrative coming forward, and we're able to infuse that into the overall design and the final product. So these fabrics are native to Alcobar area in the Province, even kind of in some of these inspiration for lighting that we took from a home and that we're going to iterate and change and tweak and adjust into our design. Even during the process, the name sometimes changes. So as we kind of go forward, it went from Berhat to Osman. So this is the final kind of product that we came up with for this Grand Hyatt. And then this is another restaurant example, Sakana, which is more of an Indonesian restaurant. So this is where it gets, for us as a design firm, gets a little bit more, we can really roll up our sleeves and lean in and dig into design. So lifestyle brands, and that's a very broad statement. And some of these brands could be categorized back into the classic brands sometimes, but it's more of an inquisitive brand. It's developing a very authentic story, and the standards are limited. There's still guidance, but it's more like the guardrails are put up for us along the way. And these can be somewhat of the classic old brands that have moved into lifestyle, such as your Renaissance, which has been around for a long time, W's, or to more so to these soft branded hotels, which Curio, Autograph, Tapestry. This is basically part of a big chain such as a Marriott or a Hilton or a Hyatt, but their standards are not as restrictive. You know, their independent name. There's not a Marriott name on it. It's more independent in its nature. We're doing a project in Chicago, which is the Reserve. It's a Marriott hotel, but it's the Reserve Autograph Collection. But it's very independent in nature, and it caters to that guest, aspirational, inquisitive. It's almost a marriage between the two. So we want to put this stat out there that, and boutique and independent are sometimes can be interchanged, or lifestyle. There is a tremendous emergence of boutique hotels in the past. And we use 2019 because that's really was the peak of our industry before everything kind of slowed down in February of 20. But the growth of boutique hotels and the conversion market, meaning from a branded hotel to a non-branded hotel, and from the conversion market from a commercial building or a residential building, was growing exponentially, even new developments along the way, versus upscale, or what we define as classic hotels, versus select service. So this was, and the guest and the traveler were responding very well to these hotels that are and still are, that are unique in nature. So this is a Renaissance hotel, which was previously an independent hotel in Toledo, Ohio. So with that, we had to do not only a renovation, but almost like a brand reposition to re-identify and re-enter it back into the Toledo market, and the expectation of people that travel to Toledo, but also locals that might frequent the hotel for food and beverage or functions. So part of the Renaissance brand is about curated moments. Their concierge is not called a concierge, it's called a curator. They provide guided tours, they give information. It's very interactive with the guest. It's almost that kind of inquisitive brand identity. Our story needs to be deeper in these projects, meaning that the design needs to be a little, our narrative development that we come up with, that our clients approve, needs to be a little bit more, I wouldn't say overstated, but stated in a clearer way. So when the guest comes in and say, oh, that's really cool, what is that? And the guest and the staff can interact and say, oh, actually, this is based off of a glassblower studio, and these are the reasons why the designer did this. So for Toledo and our narrative development, we kind of settled on a couple key tenets that drove our DNA for this project. One was glass blowing, and Libby Glass is based in Toledo, Ohio, and there's a lot of glass artisans. So that was really an interesting idea that we felt we could really infuse in the design, but also from a creative aspect, we felt guests would come to the Renaissance Toledo could really engage with that and learn about that. The other kind of quirky identity that we came up with was the idea of MASH and the influence of MASH in Toledo. So some of you, depending on your age, might know MASH was a very successful TV show in the 70s, maybe early 80s. I remember it, and I loved it. But it was based, a lot of the characters were from Ohio, and some of the characters were actually from Toledo, and it was prominent in the show. Willie's Jeep, which was prominent in the Korean War, was designed, developed, and manufactured in Toledo as well. So those we thought this could be a really interesting, different way to articulate our design in a story. So some of our narrative development that we're doing here, some of our sketchings about how we're bringing our ideas together. You can see that this inspiration here behind the lamp is kind of it was an interesting way for us to use glass blowing molds and articulate that in the front desk registration. So these are some of our further development on the mood boards. This is the rendering. And once again, we kind of ended up on a way for us to come up with a glass blowing studio as one of our tenants. You can see that the registration desks are made off of glass blowing molds. These are actually glass blowing tubes that are used in the production, and using glass and as an art installation as well. And below, we've used all these kind of different quotes from MASH to kind of infuse that with subtle details. So this is the final product. And then with these brands, while we have strong design components, we also can have kind of these little cheeky moments where, we can put in a little bit more lighthearted in its approach. It's not as, I wouldn't say the classic brands are stuffy, but they're a little more rigid. And so we can say, hello Toledo, the glass is technically always half full, and it makes it a little bit more fun, lighthearted nature for those guests that want to explore, they want to engage with the hotel, the guests, and the outer community. So as we talked about before, the subtle, more of a prominent nature, so we can see that these are glass blowing tubes that come in, they project a light down here that enter into the reception area. Once again, this is a little more industrial in nature from a glass blower studio. So these components are being a little bit more prominently placed and built into the environment. And with the hope that the guests say, wow, what is this front desk? And then there can be a story behind it that's told from the check-in person to the guest saying, oh, because of X, Y, and Z, and Libby Glass is based. And actually, we have some great, glass blowers that are down the street that do clinics or teaching, or you can go witness see the glass blowing happening in real time. So that's a wonderful way to engage your guest through design and articulate that through the guest experience. So this is something we always do after our hotels are built is, we kind of troll some of the social media and come up with how people are really interacting with our design and the experience they're getting. So we send this to our guests, our clients afterwards and say, hey, here's where we started with our design, our renderings, the drawings, but here's what really counts, right? Here's how the guests are enjoying the space, how they're hopefully coming back for repeat business along the way, and they're promoting the hotel. I mean, and that's with great interest in design, it turns into its own promotion and marketing campaign. So as you can see, these are some of the, the Jeep parts from the Willie Jeep that we talked about before. This is, projection from the tube, glass blowers tube that says, that will promote the wedding, a meeting, and it helps to interact the guests once more. Just a little interesting way to say, oh, wow, that's neat. That's a great idea. And they hopefully tell their friends, say, hey, you got to go to the Renaissance in Toledo if you go to Toledo. So this is a kind of a classic brand, another classic brand, but a little bit more in the lifestyle. It's probably one of the first boutique hotel brands that was emerged back in the mid 90s or late 90s in New York by actually Barry Sternlicht was actually the real founder of this. He's actually an he's an alumni. He's received an honorary doctorate back in, I think, 2000. So he's affiliated with the university as an alumni as well. But with W Hotels, they are, they have a very strong brand identity from a point of view of what they want to do with insider moments, disruptors. It's a very targeted niche of guests they're trying to profile. And for us, we can't take design components and say, hey, here's a great lampshade or a great lamp or chandelier we want to use in the job like we could for a classic brand. Everything has to be custom. Everything has to be unique that we put up with. So our design boards are very different. You don't see a lot of, it's more about feeling, insider moments. It's about what this property being in Saudi and Riyadh. It's a lot about the kingdom's 2030 vision and the very young population that's well-traveled, well-educated, entrepreneurial. And this is how we came up with our design narrative to help create a W that's very unique, nothing like it around the world in Riyadh. So this is, as we even our approach kind of tweaks as we move through a lifestyle hotel where it's a lot more iterative, where we're kind of throwing out ideas, we go back and forth because we're really coming in with a completely clean slate. We know that there's a few requirements for a W, which they say, such as you need to have a mixology bar or vanity in every single hotel. There has to be a dressing area here. So there's certain requirements, but we get to design those requirements versus the brand standards of a classic brand. So some of our sketches, our layouts, with that, we can change the layouts, which is great. As long as we get the components into the property, we can change how the room flows, how the layout works. In this property, we have sliding walls that are part of our kind of scene B scene type of idea in our narrative. So these walls actually move and shut off the bathroom for privacy along the way. And this gets, once again, these lifestyle brands, we have to dig in deeper and, every item is designed. So, this is part of some of the desert winds that we see and that influenced our vanity, which we started to draw and articulate along the way, which you'll see in the final renderings here. So everything is, as they say, bespoke. It's unique to this property. And then we get to do some really cool things sometimes where we love the idea of, it's kind of these cheeky moments, once again, with or the insider moment. So with this, we have this lenticular, which you can see this way, which is actually, these are this wonderful drone shot of camels in the desert, which is their shadows. And this goes down the corridor. And if you know what a lenticular is, if you look one way, it looks like this. But if you come back down the hallway the other way, we have these kind of the different colors of the desert that you see and the color and the rainbows that come through the desert coming back the other way. So it changes. It's once again, it's that insider moment where you're like, oh, when I go to my room, I see the shadows. When I come back, it's changed. And that's just, once again, it's just a different way to articulate design that make it special for the guest that a W in Riyadh would expect. So this is the last kind of segment, which is independence. These are a lot of fun for us. Not that the other ones are not fun, but these are interesting, I think, and a little bit more challenging for us. So we say this is a perceived, while it's not a brand, it's a perceived brand. They're all independent in nature. We've picked two here, which one is in Hammond's Hotel, which is in Newport, Rhode Island. And we have the Morgan, which is in St. Martin in the Caribbean. So when we say perceived brand, it's really specific to that hotel. There's no standards. It's a kind of a quirky, expressive spirit. Sometimes it does have a story. Sometimes it does not really have a story. But there's no standard. So we have freedom to let the design and the location and the service dictate that star rating that we talked about earlier on. So as an example, this is the Hammond's Hotel, which is opened up in June of 20. Our charge when we started the property was, this is a heads and beds situation. We're going to have light food and beverage. We are going to have very small rooms. 219 square feet is the average room size. That's compared to a classic brand, which is probably 350 to 400 square feet. And, we have about a Hampton Inn budget, thereabouts. So very, focused, very economical. This was what was required for this owner to maximize the return on investment and their ROI. So with the completely clean slate, with no brand standards, with no restrictions, I think that we like to say, we had the opportunity to do a full branding exercise. This document was probably about 30 or 40 pages of us just doing research and coming up with the true story for the Hammett's property. So we came up with a name. We came up with the naming of the wharf. We did a lot of research, not just from the architectural perspective, but from the historical perspective. The Newport Historical Society is wonderful. There is a treasure trove of information going back to the mid 1600s. It's a very old city for North America. And we looked at, as we went through our name exploration, we pulled up this great document of, if you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, which is what our wharf was. Our wharf, when we started, was called Commercial Wharf, and which really is not an exciting name to have for your hotel to sit on. Through our research, we were identified that there actually used to be a lumber mill on this site, which was by John Hammett. And you can see that on this old map. Next door was Langley's Wharf, which was his daughter, Sarah Langley. She was a furniture manufacturer. So the wood was milled on one side, and then the daughter had the wharf to the north of it, which she did, made furniture. So for us, this was a really interesting way to say, hey, this could be a wonderful way to have this be, to differentiate this hotel within the marketplace. Meaning that, as we developed the design, the easy thing would be is make it like the mansions on the hill, or make it like America's Cup inspired sailing. Those are the two real kind of driving tourism factors in Newport. And it didn't feel authentic to do that in a new build hotel. And more importantly, we wanted to create design that had a great story that would differentiate this property from all other properties along the way. So we came up with based off of our research with Mr. Hammett, a working waterfront hotel that was respectful of the long history of the Newport waterfront. Back up until, I think the 70s and 80s, the waterfront was pretty, rough along the way. It's not what it is today. So we want to kind of go back in time a little bit and bring that forward with a transitional design and story. So as you can see, one of our ideas was this kind of mercantile approach to design. So with that, once again, we have very small rooms, but we said, let's play with the room design. Let's make it interesting. Let's think a little bit outside our literal box. So, moving the sink outside to the bathroom, as you can see here, doing a sliding pocket door with a shower, almost like a wet room concept. And then we could only fit one bed in, but we created this kind of interesting idea of, a love seat that could also double as, a wonderful sitting viewing corridor out to the harbor beyond. Or if you come for a weekend, you could have a friend sleep there and double up a duty along the way. And we can see that in, as we get to the renderings on the next slide here. So this kind of inspires, kind of our vanity outside the room. And once again, it's got, some of the color palette of the old historic homes, the dark blues, dark colors, the more kind of muted but bold, but is really authentic to Newport architecture along the way, but not to the mansions, right? It helps to really position the Hammets in a unique category in its own. And this kind of built-in, almost a nautical nature, like this built-in component, this portal was generated to create that experience that we're recognizing the waterfront that's there with us. oh, I want to go backwards one here. And this is the kind of the mercantile nature of the lobby itself. So transitional nature, once again, it's tying to the architecture. That's really important in any great lifestyle. I mean, the architecture and interiors needs to be tied together. If you're doing a resort destination, the architecture, landscape, and interiors needs to flow together. That first entry point, that wow factor, is generated from the exteriors. So that's really important that we set the tone and bring it through into the lobby as well. So at the end of the day, it might look nice, but really what counts is how do guests react to this? So over this past summer, this 3-star hotel, which we did for a Fairfield budget, and it was a great design team, not just us, but ownership, brand, architect, contractor. We built a 3-star hotel. This hotel competes with the Marriott, the Gurney's, the Hotel Viking, which are considered 5-star hotels in the marketplace. So that's kind of the wonderful idea of that quirky nature. There's no dictation of this perceived. Each individual user is going to dictate the perceived value of this brand. Not the brand's going to dictate, but as an independent property, it's perceived by the guest. It's perceived by the reviews that you get on TripAdvisor or other sites along the way. So this hotel charged $700 a night. The Marriott down the street charged about $730 in the peak of the summer. So this is a wonderful way, and that's why we're seeing such a growth in this market, that these properties are not encumbered with a brand, which costs a lot of money and has restrictions. There are downsides to that where you don't have your reservation system, but through other sites, they can generate the revenue and guest nights. So this is the Morgan Hotel. I think this is the last case study that we have. This is a property in St. Martin. We started this project in 2018. So if you recall, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was some really hard-hitting hurricanes that went through, and St. Martin was devastated by one of the, I think it was Hurricane Ida, came through and just devastated the island. The airport was shut down for a year. I think in the lagoon, there's 130 boats sunk. It was just a really massive storm that went through, and it shut and decimated this hotel. So our client came and said, we want to reposition this as an independent property, but we have to change the identity of the property. So different than the Hamlets, which was new build, and we were creating something. This one we had to rebrand, recreate, and reintroduce it to the marketplace. St. Martin's a wonderful island. It's split between Dutch and French. Down the middle, it's kind of, you go over a hill, you go from the French side or the Dutch side to the French side. Each side of the island is a little bit different, which is interesting as well. So it gave us a plethora of just great stuff to dive into, really. So part of our narrative development, we kind of went into the history of what was unique about the island, not just from a point of view of tourism, but from economics. There was the lagoon, there was a prominent salt. They harvested salt from there. Indigo was also exported from St. Martin. Sugarcane, actually, and they had these unique cows there as well. And there's a huge cruise ship terminal that influences probably the current economy very much so. The architectural vernacular was very interesting as well. It's kind of this Arubian kind of Dutch influence, bright colors. You can see the Dutch influence on this side of the island. And then the social aspect. I mean, obviously the diving is wonderful. The food in St. Martin is some of the best in the Caribbean. And it's a really social kind of, resort experience along the way. So people roam through the island is probably the best way to put it. And it's a little quirky, and that really lends itself for us to kind of create an interest inside. So this is the existing property when we toured it back in December of 2018. As you can see, actually this whole roof was blown off. The hotel was shuttered. It was really kind of in rough shape. With that, we wanted to make sure that we had to kind of redo the exterior to clean it up, so past guests would have a new expectation, and kind of reintroduces, as I said before, into the marketplace. So a lot of that is going through great planning. One thing is, we're doing design, we're picking materials, we're creating design elements, but great planning is also really important to our design to create something that's helps to make the space sing and create that wow factor as we enter a lobby. So for this this property, we actually blew out all the rooms, made it a 2-story lobby, cleaned up all the building in the front to try and create that wow factor. Because you walk in the lobby as it existed, you couldn't even see the ocean barely. And that's not what as you come off of a flight from Europe or from North America after 4 to 6 hours, you want to walk in the lobby and see the ocean beyond. So these are some of our renderings that we took from our kind of our narrative, creating this wave concept that comes through the lobby. As I said before, indigo was harvested there back in the late 1800s. So that inspired a lot of our color palette and this kind of this open air flow that we wanted to create within the experience. This kind of chair was created from local weaving patterns, and the same thing with the fabrics on the pillows. So our room ideas along the way. One thing I do want to point out that while we're creating these great ideas, we also have to be really cognizant of the fact that even though we're creating an independent branded hotel, we also have to make sure it's buildable. So no matter how great of idea that we might come up with that ownership loves or our design story is really strong, if it cannot be executed, the hotel will fail or not be as successful. I think it's a better way to put it. So whatever we're drawing in these overseas markets where the quality of labor is not quite there, that influences our design as well. So as we look at this guest room here, we've once again based off the indigo patterns and the palm trees. Most of this room is built overseas because it's a very FF&A approach. Furniture, fabrics are all built overseas and kind of shipped in, dropped in, because the quality of the labor wouldn't get the level of execution that would make this hotel great. So that's also influences our design, as we move into the independence along the way. So some of the final renderings of the lobby and the guest rooms, and some of the implementation as well. Now, while we go through and identify everything, sometimes our ideas don't get through. I don't want to say that whatever we present gets approved, but as an example, we came up with naming of the restaurants. And what we did was did a lot of research on Papiamento, the language that is off from the Taino Indians and some of the native tribes in the Caribbean. And we came up with Salu was the restaurant. Salu didn't make the cut. Salt did, and that was what the name of the restaurant. Salu is for salt. And that kind of went back to the story of the harvesting of the salt along the way. But overall, this hotel, it's probably a 4-star product. It competes at the 5-star level once again, because it's not encumbered by a lifestyle big corporate brand. It's dictated by the market and the design and the service. And these are some of our Instagrammable moments along the way, that how the resort's coming together and how people are experiencing it. And that's it. So the question really comes to is, what brand do you aspire to? Where do you see yourself being along the way? And where, what fits and feels good for you? Because I think as we move forward, there are going to be more and more brands entered in. And as we as we've defined these buckets and silos, as we've kind of defined them, there's not a lot of gray area in between each of the brands as we move forward from a point of view of the select, the classic, and the lifestyle. Independents are going to be independent. They're going to operate on their own. They're going to do their own thing. They're going to be quirky. But the other 3 categories, you're going to constantly see, we're seeing new brands slide in and kind of just blur the lines as we move forward. That's it. Thank you for all the time. And hopefully I didn't bore you too much and put you to sleep.
Oh, not at all. I thank you so much for such an informative presentation. I have to say, I'm sure I can echo the sentiments of so many of us. I will never look at a hotel, a property the same way again in terms of the design and the different features and things that I'll be interacting with. It's the kind of thing that we sort of experience in a way that we expect that we're going to see a certain level, but to be able to peek behind the scenes and see how much planning has gone into it is really quite eye-opening. I'm going to look very quickly here in terms of a question, and here's one that came through that we'd like to, if you could share some information about. When you talked about the Hammett's property and the historical element, one of the things that was the question that came up was, to what degree does historical preservation guidelines play into your planning for people-centric design in a property?
It depends on the property. And that's not a way to get out of the answer. I think, in a new build property such as Hammett's, that was a parking lot. So there was not a lot of historical elements from the interior's perspective. On the exterior, it went through a city review and making sure it ties into the nature of the street and the facades down the road. But there was more restrictions about waterfront and the access to the waterfront of that property. That's really what was a big kind of pushback from the community. Like, because in Rhode Island, which is wonderful, is there's everybody has access to the waterfront, right? And public access is really important. So that was one of the things that actually drove into the design, because if you've been to Hammett's, you kind of walk under a bridge and there's a public access in the middle of the property. One side has a restaurant, the other side has the hotel. The middle is open for anyone to walk out and look at a beautiful sunset coming down through. Now, on historic renovations or historic registered properties, it depends on your community. As an example, if you go to some communities and cities have a lot more restrictive components. We were doing a property in Miami, which was kind of the 50s Art Deco kind of hotel, Morris Lapidus architecture. And, there was a lot of things, even from the point of view of the handrail, that was really patinaed and weathered and not really great shape. We couldn't change that because, and the terrazzo on the floor had to remain. So the historical review kind of almost acts like a brand sometimes, where it's putting more restrictions and standards on you. And that's, I never really thought of it this way, but there's an interaction between us and them saying, we'll go back and say, listen, we understand that this is really important. And for us, it's a great way to bring the history and design through. But sometimes it just doesn't work, right? It doesn't make sense. It's going to be a hindrance. It's not going to make the property really successful along the way. So for us, we'd love to protect those things, but it has to make sense. So, but every city is different. Every historical preservation society is different along the way, but it does weigh heavily for us.
Thank you so much for providing that additional insight. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our time together. So we want to thank you again for this wonderful presentation and for opening our eyes to such a unique and important part of the industry. Great. To our attendees, we'll now have a short break before our next session, Global Hotel Industry Overview, which will begin at 11:15. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to the remainder of today's Hospitality Summit.
Thank you.